You've heard of Greece, and you've heard of Serbia too. But did you know that stuck right in between them is a country that most people couldn't point on a map? North Macedonia is a place shaped caught between East and West for centuries. And yet, most people still don't know much about it. So if you're even a little curious about hidden histories, global politics, or why this small country matters more than you think, keep watching. We're breaking down everything from its roots to its modern-day culture. North Macedonia's ancient roots stretch back to Neolithic times. And over the centuries, waves of Indo-European tribes, followed by Dacians, Thracians, Illyrians, Greeks and Romans, turned the region into a cultural and political crossroads. So with so many empires shaping its past, you'd think the country's biggest struggle would be something epic. But surprisingly, one of the fiercest battles it faced was over its name. The country gained independence peacefully in 1991 after breaking away from Yugoslavia, and they named themselves Macedonia. Simple enough, right? But Greece wasn't having it. They said using that name implied Macedonia had claims over Greece's northern region, which is also called Macedonia. And just like that, what should have been a fresh start turned into a diplomatic struggle. Greece blocked their entry into the UN unless they agreed to change the name. And so, in 1993, the country was admitted under the title the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Not exactly catchy, but over 130 countries, including the US, decided to call it the Republic of Macedonia. But still, the issue didn't go away. Meanwhile, things were heating up at home too. Ethnic Albanians, who make up a large chunk of the population, felt like they were being left behind politically and economically. And in 2001, that frustration turned into armed conflict. For a few tense months, there was real fighting between ethnic Albanian rebels and government forces. But eventually, both sides came to the table and signed what's known as the Ohrid Framework Agreement. It ended the violence and promised more rights for minorities, like recognising Albanian as an official language and making sure ethnic Albanians had better access to public jobs. From there, things started to shift. North Macedonia was slowly working its way toward joining Western alliances, but the name issue still loomed over everything. So, in 2008, Greece blocked their NATO invitation over it. But then came a breakthrough. In 2018, Macedonia and Greece signed the Prespa Agreement, where the country agreed to change its name to North Macedonia. It wasn't easy. It stirred up a lot of emotion at home, but it cleared the path. By 2020, they were officially in NATO, and in 2022, they opened EU accession talks after resolving a separate dispute with Bulgaria. But the road hasn't exactly been smooth. Even today, North Macedonia is still wrestling with a few big challenges: reforms, economic growth, fighting corruption, and keeping the peace between its different communities. So, yeah, for a country that got its independence without firing a shot, the years that followed were anything but quiet. But what's even more interesting is how much of that tension, both political and cultural, has been shaped by the country's geography. It's landlocked, tucked away in the south-central Balkans, not particularly huge or heavily populated. But here's the twist. North Macedonia sits at one of the most important crossroads in all of southeastern Europe, and that's shaped its history more than any war or treaty ever could. It's bordered by Kosovo and Serbia to the north, Bulgaria to the east, Greece to the south, and Albania to the west. And right at the heart of it all is the capital, Skopje. Geographically speaking, the country covers about 2/5 of the larger region historically known as Macedonia. The rest? That's split between Greece and Bulgaria, which is why you'll sometimes hear locals refer to this part as Vardar Macedonia, while the Greek side is called Aegean Macedonia, and the Bulgarian side Pirin Macedonia. So as you can see, even geography here comes with a bit of a political backstory. But what really makes North Macedonia special is its terrain. It's mostly mountains, rugged, dramatic, and absolutely stunning. In fact, some peaks rise well above the tree line at over 6,600 feet, or around 2,000 metres, the tallest of them all. Mount Korab, clocking in at about 9,030 feet, or 2,752 metres, right along the border with Albania. And between those mountains you'll find deep valleys, winding rivers, and lakes so ancient they formed from tectonic activity. Two of the most famous ones are Lake Ohrid and Lake Prespa, and they're tucked away in the southwest. And they're not just pretty vacation spots either, they're actually some of the oldest and deepest lakes in Europe, formed by the Earth shifting and cracking over millions of years. Speaking of shifting, North Macedonia sits on active fault lines, which means earthquakes are a big thing here. One of the worst in recent memory was in 1963, when a massive quake almost completely destroyed Skopje. And yet, the city bounced back. And with all that natural variety, it's no surprise the country has some seriously rich biodiversity. The forests in the northwest are packed with wildlife. Bears, wolves, wild boars, even lynx if you're lucky. Down in the valleys and dry areas, you'll find a whole different ecosystem. Think grasshoppers, small lizards, and plants that have adapted to summer heat. Additionally, some forests have been cleared over the years for grazing, but large areas still remain, especially in the higher elevations. And if you think that's all there is to North Macedonia's geography, think again, because next up, we're talking about the weather. North Macedonia sits at the meeting point of Mediterranean and continental climates, so the seasons can be a bit unpredictable. You'll get cold, snowy winters in the mountains, hot, dry summers in the valleys, and sudden shifts in temperature thanks to winds like the Vardarek, a chilly blast that rushes down through the Vardar Valley. But on average, temperatures hover around freezing in January and climb into the 70s in Fahrenheit, or low to mid-20s in Celsius in July. And when it comes to rain, it's fairly modest here, because most of it falls in spring and late autumn. So even though North Macedonia may not have a coastline or flashy megacities, it's got something even better: dramatic mountains, ancient lakes, fertile valleys, and one of the most complex and beautiful landscapes in the Balkans. But more than shaping the weather or the country's wildlife, this unique landscape has influenced geopolitics too. So up next, we'll dive into the country's geopolitics, how this small nation balances relationships with bigger neighbours, handles identity debates, and manages to hold its own in a region that's anything but simple. Back in the Yugoslav days, especially after 1945, North Macedonia went through a massive economic transformation. Under Yugoslavian policy on socialist self-management, there was a big push to industrialise. The idea was to modernise each republic. But even with that boost, Macedonia remained one of the poorest in the federation. Sure, money flowed in, but not always wisely. Take Skopje, for example. Someone thought it would be a great place for a steel industry, but they didn't exactly think through where the raw materials or customers were going to come from. And despite the heavy presence of state-run industries, private farming and small businesses stuck around, especially in agriculture, crafts and retail. About 70% of farmland stayed in private hands, and even though it produced about half of the country's food, most private enterprises stayed pretty traditional. Family-run, low-tech, and cautious. However, things got tougher in the 90s after Yugoslavia fell apart. Suddenly, Macedonia, now on its own, lost access to the markets it relied on, especially in the Soviet bloc. Add in a UN trade blockade aimed at Serbia and Montenegro, and a name dispute with Greece that scared off foreign investors. It's safe to say that the economy had a rough start. But here's where it gets interesting. Even with all that pressure, North Macedonia started to rebuild. By the mid-90s, it was forming new trade relationships. The economy slowly picked up, and when the 2008 global financial crisis hit, it actually weathered the storm better than many other countries. Now, North Macedonia's economy isn't huge. It's around $16.7 billion in nominal GDP in 2024, and is expected to hit $17.89 billion in 2025. But for a country of under 2 million people, it's holding steady and showing signs of growth. So where does the money come from? Agriculture plays a smaller role these days, but it's still important, making up about 10% of GDP and 15% of jobs. Tobacco is a major crop, along with grapes, apples, veggies, and some wheat and rice. There's also a big focus on dairy and wine production, especially from regions around Tikveš and Ohrid. The country's also sitting on a decent stash of minerals: zinc, iron, copper, lead, nickel, even gold and silver. But the mining industry mostly focuses on lignite, or brown coal. That's the main fuel for power generation here, which means over 75% of electricity comes from fossil fuels, while hydro takes care of the rest. Manufacturing makes up a smaller slice of the pie, less than 20% of GDP, but it's still vital. Thanks to all those minerals, metallurgy's been a long-standing pillar. But in recent years, the country's also gotten into car parts, electronics, and even clothing. Some of that is driven by foreign-owned factories that popped up after Macedonia opened up to more international investment. So now that we're on the topic of money, the currency is called the dinar, and the financial system is overseen by the National Bank. Interestingly, a lot of the capital in Macedonian banks actually comes from foreign investors, which shows just how tied the economy is with outside markets. And when it comes to trade, North Macedonia's biggest partners today include Germany, the UK, Serbia, Greece, Bulgaria, Italy, and China, with its main exports being iron and steel, clothing, and food products. On the flip side, it imports mostly machinery, petroleum, and, you guessed it, more iron and steel. Now, while the economy's made some real progress, you can't really talk about it without talking about how it's all managed. Who makes the decisions, who holds power, and how the country's political system works. When the country declared independence in 1991, it built a new political system from the ground up. The backbone of that system is the Sobrani. That's what they call their parliament. It's a single-chamber assembly with 120 seats. And right from the start, the constitution set up a clear separation of powers between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. But unlike in some countries, the Prime Minister and their cabinet aren't part of the parliament. They run the executive branch, which, in practice, is the one with the most power. Basically, the parliament and the courts are mainly there to keep things in check, acting as guardrails to prevent overreach. There's also a president, but that role is more symbolic. The president is elected for a 5-year term and can only serve twice. They're technically the head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but in reality, most of the day-to-day governing falls on the prime minister. But North Macedonia's government isn't just about structure, it's also about inclusion. All the tension with the Albanian minority, especially in the early 2000s, the constitution was amended in 2001 to better protect minority rights. That was a key part of the Ohrid Framework Agreement, which helped bring peace after the ethnic conflict earlier that year. So now, the legal framework includes specific provisions aimed at making sure ethnic Albanians have equal footing, whether it's language rights, representation, or access to public institutions. That said, let's take a closer look at the culture, how people live, what they celebrate, and the rich mix of influences that make North Macedonia more than just a dot on the map. Let's start with daily life, because if you really want to understand North Macedonia, you've got to start at the table. Centuries of Ottoman rule left their mark, especially on the cuisine, which blends Balkan comfort with a touch of Turkish flair. Locals love their ajvar, a rich red pepper spread that ends up on nearly everything. And there are also dishes like tavche gravche, or baked beans, shopska salad, and selsko meso, which is pork and mushrooms swimming in gravy. Of course, food is just one way people connect with their roots. Religion and history also shape everyday life. Alongside major Christian and Islamic holidays, one of the most important days on the calendar is September 8th. This is their Independence Day, marking the moment North Macedonia broke away from Yugoslavia in 1991. But even during times of repression, when Serbian rulers refused to recognise the Macedonian language, writers and poets pushed back, quietly building a national literary identity. Krste Misirkov was one of the earliest voices, and he paved the way for others like Kosta Racine, Ako Shopov, and Slavko Janevski, who wrote the country's very first novel. But that was just the start, because that creative spirit didn't stay on the page for long. In 1994, the film Before the Rain by Milcho Manchevski put North Macedonia on the world stage with an Oscar nomination, a rare moment that captured the soul of the nation through cinema. Besides their impressive waves in cinema, we also have to talk about the country's sport. Football is the national obsession, especially since North Macedonia made its Olympic debut as an independent country in 1996. But other sports like basketball, volleyball, and even chess have loyal fan bases here. And then for people craving the outdoors, the country's wild, mountainous terrain offers skiing in Mavrovo, hiking in the Shar Mountains, and weekend hunting trips in the deep woods. So that's North Macedonia, a small country with a big story. Now that you know a little bit about this hidden gem, I want to know, would you add this to your bucket list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this one, you'll love this next one.